I never thought my life would take such a turn. I grew up in small towns, lived a quiet life, worked regular jobs, and never gave much thought to stories about ghosts, creatures, or things that go bump in the night. I laughed them off like most people do. But everything changed the year I decided to move closer to the Appalachian Mountains. It was supposed to be my escape, my chance to live simpler, away from the constant noise and rush of the city. Instead, it became the beginning of something I can't fully explain even now. When I first arrived, it was beautiful. The cabin I rented was modest, just 2 bedrooms, a small porch, and a wood stove that filled the place with the scent of burning oak. The air was clean in a way I had never known before, sharp and fresh in the mornings, almost sweet in the evenings. My neighbors were miles away. At first, that solitude felt like freedom. I could drink coffee on my porch and listen to nothing but the rustle of trees, the call of birds, and the faint whisper of the wind moving through the valley. The locals had warned me, not directly, but in passing. At the general store, the old man at the counter told me, "You'll hear things out there. Don't pay it too much mind. The mountains have their voices, that's all." I thought he was just being folksy. Then one woman who sold me fresh eggs at the farmer's market lowered her voice and said, "Be careful about staying out after dark. There's things in those woods you don't want to run into." She gave a half smile after saying it, like maybe it was a joke, but her eyes didn't match the smile. For the first few weeks, nothing strange happened. I hiked during the day, cooked simple meals, and tried to settle into a routine. I worked remotely, so most of my human contact came from phone calls and the occasional trip into town. Nights were quiet but not silent. I'd hear owls, raccoons shuffling through leaves, and sometimes coyotes in the distance. It was wild, yes, but nothing to be afraid of. Then one night I woke up to a sound. It wasn't an animal call I recognized. It wasn't the high-pitched yip of coyotes or the deep hoot of an owl. It was low, drawn out, and seemed to echo against the trees. My first thought was that it must be a bear, but the tone was wrong. It sounded almost like a person moaning, but stretched in a way that made my stomach tighten. I sat up in bed listening. It came again, closer this time, and my skin prickled. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, maybe even my imagination. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. I kept still, barely breathing, as if the sound might notice me. After a while, it faded, and eventually exhaustion pulled me back to sleep. The next morning, I told myself it was just part of living near the wild. Animals made all sorts of sounds. I shrugged it off, but the nights didn't get quieter. Each one seemed to carry something new. Sometimes it was the strange moan, sometimes a series of clicks or knocks that echoed like someone hitting 2 stones together. I thought maybe it was just the trees settling or branches breaking in the wind. But the more I tried to explain it away, the more uneasy I became. One night I stepped out onto the porch around midnight. The moon was high, casting silver light through the trees, and the forest seemed almost peaceful. Then I caught movement at the edge of the clearing. It wasn't close, but it was enough to freeze me in place. A tall figure, darker than the shadows around it, stood just beyond the tree line. I squinted, thinking maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks. But then it moved. Not fast, not slow, but steady, slipping behind the trees. My heart hammered, and I rushed back inside, locking the door. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on, clutching the heavy flashlight I'd bought for hiking. In the morning, I went out to look, hoping to find footprints, something to prove it was real. The ground was covered with leaves and soft soil, but I swear I found impressions. Large, not quite human, not quite animal. Too wide, too long. I crouched there staring at them until I realized I was shaking. I wanted to leave right then, but something in me resisted. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness. I told myself I wasn't going to run just because of some noises and shadows. I'd worked too hard to get away from the city and find peace here. I wasn't going to let fear take it away. Still, the tension grew. Every evening as the sun went down, I felt it, the weight of the night pressing closer. I started closing the shutters, double-checking the locks, and keeping a lantern lit by my bed. My dreams turned restless, full of half-seen shapes and voices whispering just beyond my hearing. Sometimes I woke with the sense that something had been watching me as I slept. Then came the night that changed everything. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard a scratching on the wall. Not the roof, not the porch, but the wall right beside me. Slow, deliberate, like claws dragging against wood. My heart stopped, and I pressed my ear to the mattress, listening. The sound circled the cabin, scraping along the outside walls. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the window. That's when I saw the shadow pass by. Tall, impossibly tall, its head brushing the window frame, though it was outside on the ground. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The scratching stopped, and the silence was worse than the noise. Then faintly, I heard that same low moan right outside my window. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the corner of the room, flashlight in one hand, kitchen knife in the other, waiting for the sun to rise. When it finally did, I felt like I had survived something I couldn't name. I told myself I'd leave, pack up, call the landlord, and go back to the city. But when the daylight came, it all seemed so unreal. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe it was just the stress of being alone for too long. I convinced myself to stay, but deep down, I knew. Something was out there, something that wasn't supposed to exist, and it had noticed me. I thought I could handle it. That was the first mistake. After that night with the scratching and the shadow, I spent the next morning trying to convince myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. I even laughed a little, pacing the cabin with my coffee mug, telling myself how ridiculous I was being. But every time my eyes drifted to the window, I remembered the shape of that shadow and the sound of claws on wood. It sat heavy in my chest like a stone. The day passed slow. I tried to work, answering emails and making calls, but my mind kept wandering back to the night before. Around lunchtime, I decided to go outside and check the perimeter again. The air was crisp and still, and the woods seemed almost too quiet. I walked the edge of the clearing, scanning for footprints like I had before. At first there was nothing, just damp leaves and pine needles. But then I found a print again. This time it was clearer. It looked almost human at first glance, but was far too big, easily twice the length of my own foot and much wider. The toes, or what looked like toes, were long and clawed at the tips, leaving faint grooves in the soil. I knelt down, staring at it for what felt like forever. A gust of wind came through the trees and made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. I stood quickly, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Just the endless stretch of trunks and shadows. But I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I backed toward the cabin, my heart thudding harder with every step. By the time I was inside, I had locked the door without even realizing it. That night, I couldn't bring myself to turn the lights off. I kept the kitchen lamp on, the living room light on, even a candle burning in the bathroom. It made the cabin glow warm and yellow, but it didn't calm me. I sat at the table with my laptop open, trying to research animal tracks in the Appalachians. Bears, coyotes, mountain lions. I went through every possibility. Nothing matched what I had seen. Around 11 p.m., just when I started to think maybe I'd finally calmed down enough to sleep, I heard it again. A knocking sound. Slow, deliberate. 3 knocks, then silence. I froze. It wasn't on the door, it was on the wall. Then it came again, this time from a different side of the cabin. 3 knocks. Silence. My stomach turned cold. I grabbed the flashlight and turned off the laptop. The glow from the screen was making me feel exposed. I crouched low, creeping toward the window. Outside, the moonlight made the clearing look like a silver lake. Nothing moved. The trees swayed slightly, but their shadows were still. Then, just at the edge of the tree line, I saw it again. It was taller than before, or maybe I was just seeing it more clearly now. Its body was thin, almost too thin for its height, and its arms hung long, nearly to its knees. It wasn't human, but it wasn't any animal I'd ever seen. Its head tilted slightly like it was studying the cabin. Even from that distance, I felt its attention on me like a weight. It took a step forward, my breath caught. Then another step. I scrambled back from the window, tripping over the chair. By the time I found the courage to look again, it was gone. The clearing was empty, silent, like nothing had ever been there. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the corner again, this time with the flashlight and my old hunting rifle. I'd bought it years ago, but rarely used it. Now it felt like the only thing between me and whatever was out there. Every creak of the cabin made me jump. I kept telling myself I'd leave at dawn, just grab my things and go. Morning came, pale and gray, but I didn't feel any safer. I packed a bag with essentials, wallet, phone, keys, some clothes, and stuffed it in the car. But when I tried to start the engine, nothing happened. Dead battery. My stomach dropped. I swore under my breath and tried again. Nothing. I went back inside and called for a tow truck. The nearest one was over an hour away, and the man on the phone sounded distracted, like he wasn't really listening. "We'll try to get someone out there," he said. "But it might be tomorrow." Tomorrow. I stared at the phone, feeling the weight of that word. Tomorrow meant another night here, another night with it. I decided to hike out toward the main road. It was about 5 miles according to the map. I figured I could flag someone down for help, or at least feel less trapped. I left a note on the door just in case the tow truck came early, and set off with my backpack. The trail started easy but quickly grew rough. The deeper I went into the woods, the more the silence pressed in. No bird song, no rustling of small animals. Just the sound of my own footsteps and my breathing. It felt like walking into a dream or a trap. About 2 miles in, I found something strange. A tree, its bark shredded in long vertical lines. The cuts were too high for a bear, too deep for a person. I ran my fingers along one of the gouges. The wood was fresh, splintered and damp. I stepped back, looking around. That's when I heard it again. The low moan, distant but unmistakable. It echoed through the trees, rising and falling like some ancient call. My heart raced. I didn't know whether to run or hide. I chose to keep moving, faster now, almost jogging. The sound followed me, growing louder, closer. Branches cracked somewhere behind me. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop until I stumbled onto the gravel shoulder of the main road. I stood there, bent over, gasping for air. Cars passed by occasionally, but no one stopped. I tried calling the tow company again, but there was no signal. My phone just showed a blank screen. I stood there for what felt like an hour before finally turning back. The walk back to the cabin felt worse. The trees seemed darker, the shadows deeper. I kept hearing faint footsteps behind me, but every time I turned, nothing was there. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun was dipping low behind the ridgeline. I shut the door behind me and locked it. My whole body was trembling. I realized then that I wasn't just scared. I was being hunted. That night, I didn't sit at the table or in the corner. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, rifle across my lap, flashlight in hand, waiting. The sun went down and the dark pressed in like a living thing. Hours passed. The cabin creaked. The wind moved softly against the windows. Then just past midnight, I heard it again. Not scratching this time, not knocking. A whisper. Soft, just on the edge of hearing. My name. When I heard my name whispered through the walls that night, something in me broke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even a clear voice. It was like a breath brushing past my ear. A sound that seemed to slip through the cracks in the cabin. But it was my name. I knew it. Every hair on my arm stood up and my heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I froze for a long time, sitting there on the floor with my back against the door. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew I had just crossed some invisible line. It wasn't just watching me anymore. It knew me. I stayed that way for hours, listening to every creak and sigh of the cabin. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, circling the house. I held the rifle tight, trying to steady my breathing. The steps stopped at the window near my bed. Silence. Then ever so slowly, the handle on the front door rattled. Just a tiny movement, like someone testing it. My grip on the rifle tightened until my knuckles went white. Then, nothing. No more steps, no more whispering. The silence after was worse than the sounds. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I didn't move until dawn broke through the trees. When the light finally came, it felt thin and weak, like it couldn't really push back the darkness. I opened the door slowly, rifle raised. The yard looked normal at first glance. Then I saw the marks on the porch. 3 long scratches running parallel along the wooden boards, like claws dragging as something walked past. I knew I couldn't spend another night like that. The tow truck still hadn't come. My phone still had no signal. The sense of being trapped grew heavier. I decided to walk to the nearest neighbor, a man named Carter, who lived about 3 miles down the old logging road. I'd only met him once when I moved in. He was in his 60s, wiry with a weathered face and a quiet way about him. If anyone knew these woods, it would be him. I set out late in the morning with my backpack and the rifle slung over my shoulder. The road was narrow and lined with pines, their needles making a soft carpet underfoot. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched again. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, but the road behind me was empty. When I reached Carter's place, it was a small, sturdy cabin with a tin roof and a stack of firewood taller than me. Smoke curled from the chimney. I knocked on the door and waited. After a moment, it opened and Carter stood there, squinting into the light. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, stepping aside to let me in. I told him everything. The noises, the footprints, the shadow at the edge of the clearing, the whispering voice. I didn't even care if I sounded crazy, I just needed someone to hear it. Carter listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You're not the first," he said finally. "These mountains have stories older than we are. Things in the woods folks don't like to talk about." "What things?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He stood up and went to a shelf, pulling down a small wooden box. From it, he took an old map, edges frayed and yellowed. He spread it out on the table and pointed to a section not far from where my cabin sat. "This here's where you are," he said. "And this here," he tapped a spot deeper into the woods, "is where nobody goes anymore. Used to be an old settlement there way back before my granddaddy's time. Folks disappeared. Livestock, too. People said something hunted them at night. They called it the Long Man." "The Long Man?" I repeated, my stomach tightening. "Tall, thin arms down to its knees. Moves like a shadow. Makes sounds that aren't right. Some say it's a spirit of the mountains, some say it's older than that. Either way, you don't want it paying attention to you." I stared at him. What am I supposed to do? Stay inside at night, he said. Keep your lights low. Don't answer if it calls your name. I felt cold all over. It already did, I whispered. Carter's eyes flicked to mine, and for the first time I saw fear there. Then you've got a problem, he said quietly. He gave me a small pouch of something that smelled like cedar and smoke. Hang this over your door, he told me. Old trick. Might help, might not. Either way, it can't hurt. I thanked him and started back toward my cabin, the pouch clutched tight in my hand. The walk back felt longer. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches like fingers reaching down. Every so often I heard faint clicking sounds like stones knocking together, always just behind me. When I finally stepped into the clearing, the sun was already dipping behind the ridge. The cabin looked small and fragile against the backdrop of darkening trees. I hung the pouch over the doorframe and locked every window. That night I sat in the middle of the floor with the lights off, just one candle burning. The silence pressed in like a weight. Hours crawled by. Then sometime after midnight I heard the moan again, low and drawn out but closer than ever. It circled the cabin, moving from one wall to the next. I gripped the rifle and tried not to breathe, then it spoke again. Not my name this time. Just a sound, like a word, but not in any language I knew. The candle flickered hard, throwing shadows across the room. The air grew colder, like the warmth was being sucked out. I squeezed my eyes shut and whispered to myself over and over, "It's not real, it's not real, it's not real." When I opened them, I saw a hand pressed against the window. Long fingers, too many joints, nails like black glass. It slid slowly down the glass, leaving a faint trail of frost behind. I raised the rifle and aimed, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't keep the sight steady. The hand disappeared. Silence again. I sat there until the first gray light of dawn crept into the cabin. My body felt hollow. My mind stretched thin. I knew now that this wasn't going to stop on its own. Whatever it wasn't going to leave me alone. I had to find out what it was. Or I wasn't going to survive. I didn't sleep after that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hand on the window. The long, jointed fingers. The black nails. The trail of frost. It was burned into my mind like a photograph. By morning, my whole body felt like a wire pulled too tight. I sat at the table staring at nothing until the coffee grew cold. I knew I couldn't keep hiding in the cabin. Whatever this thing was, it was closing in. Carter's warning about the long man kept echoing in my head. If it had already spoken my name, then I was marked somehow. And if I didn't act soon, it was going to end with me disappearing into those woods like the people from the old settlement. By mid-morning, I had made up my mind. I had to see that place for myself, the ruins of the settlement Carter had marked on the map. Maybe I'd find answers there. Maybe something to help me fight back. The idea terrified me, but sitting here waiting for it to come through the door terrified me more. I packed a small bag with food, water, a flashlight, and extra batteries. I slung the rifle over my shoulder. The sky was pale and heavy with low clouds as I locked the cabin door behind me. The cedar-scented pouch still hung over the frame, its smell sharp in the cold air. I touched it once for luck, then headed toward the trail. The woods swallowed me quickly. The deeper I went, the darker it seemed to get, even though it was barely noon. The trees here grew older and thicker, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their roots like veins snaking across the ground. The silence was deeper too, not just the absence of sound, but the kind of quiet that feels alive. About 2 miles in, I started noticing carvings on some of the trees, symbols I didn't recognize, circles with slashes through them, spirals with dots at the center. Some were old and faint, others looked newer. I ran my fingers over one, the groove smooth under my touch. It didn't feel like random graffiti. It felt like a warning. The path became harder to follow as it dipped into a shallow valley. Moss covered the rocks and the air smelled damp like earth and stone. Then I started seeing pieces of wood scattered on the ground, old beams, rotted boards, the remains of cabins long gone, the settlement. I stepped into what must have been the main clearing. The outlines of a few structures were still visible. Stone foundations, collapsed chimneys, a few upright posts that looked like they might fall over if I breathed too hard. Everything was gray and lifeless, like the world had drained the color out of it. In the center of the clearing stood something stranger still, a totem of sorts made from branches and animal bones lashed together with rope. It was taller than me, its top crowned with what looked like the skull of a deer but twisted, the antlers bent and curling like claws. At its base, the ground was bare, as though nothing had dared grow there for a long time. I crouched to look closer. Symbols like the ones on the trees were carved into the bones, deep and deliberate. The sight made my stomach clench. This wasn't just superstition. Whoever built this had believed in something real enough to try and ward it off. I circled the totem slowly, my fingers brushing the rifle's stock. As I came around the other side, I saw something half buried in the dirt. A leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. I pulled it free, brushing off the soil. Inside, the pages were brittle but still legible. The handwriting was spidery and old-fashioned. I sat on a stone and began to read. The entries were dated from over a century ago. They spoke of strange sounds at night, livestock going missing, people seeing a tall shadow moving through the woods. One entry near the end made my blood run cold. "It knows our names," it read. "Once it calls you, you are marked. It waits for you to be alone, then it takes you into the trees. You do not come back." Another page described a ritual, burning cedar and salt at the four corners of a home, never answering when it calls, never looking directly at it if it appears. The last entry was smeared and frantic. "It stands outside now, it watches, we are already gone." My hands trembled as I closed the journal. This wasn't just legend. This was the same thing happening to me over 100 years later. A sound broke the silence, a faint click like stones tapping together. My head snapped up. The trees at the edge of the clearing were dark with shadow. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it, watching. I stuffed the journal into my bag and backed away from the totem. The clicking came again, closer now. Then the low moan rose, curling through the air like smoke. It sounded angry this time, or hungry. I turned and ran. Branches tore at my clothes as I crashed through the undergrowth, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The moan followed, rising and falling like some awful song. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, my legs burning, my chest on fire. At one point, I tripped and fell hard, scraping my palms on the rocks. I lay there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. The woods around me were dead silent. I thought maybe I'd lost it. Then a shape passed between the trees, impossibly tall and thin. Its arms brushed the ground as it moved. Its head turned slowly toward me. I couldn't see its face, only the outline, but that was enough. My stomach dropped like a stone. I scrambled to my feet and ran again, this time with no sense of direction. The trees blurred past. My only thought was to get out, to reach the cabin, to get somewhere with walls between me and it. I burst out of the tree line just as the sun was beginning to set. The cabin stood ahead, small and fragile, but still there. I stumbled up the porch steps, slammed the door behind me, and locked it. My hands shook so badly I dropped the rifle. The pouch of cedar still hung over the door, but its smell had faded. I pressed my back against the wall and slid down to the floor, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. Night fell fast. The forest outside went black, and then, as if on cue, the knocking began again. 3 slow knocks, silence, then 3 more. Moving from wall to wall. I closed my eyes, clutching the journal to my chest. I had answers now, but they weren't comforting. This thing wasn't just a story, it wasn't just a creature. It was something older, something that marked people, waited, and took them. And now it was waiting for me. I knew that night was going to be the last one. Either I would face it, or it would take me. There was no middle ground anymore. The knocking had started as the sun went down, slow and patient, circling the cabin like a predator circling its prey. Every time the sound stopped, the silence pressed in like a weight. I sat on the floor with my back to the wall, the journal open in my lap, reading the same pages over and over. The ritual, cedar and salt. Don't answer it, don't look at it. 4 corners of the home. My hands shook as I packed salt from the kitchen into 4 small piles at the corners of the cabin. I lit the last of my candles and set them near the doors and windows. The smell of burnt cedar from Carter's pouch mixed with the acrid tang of the salt. I knew it might not work. The people from the settlement had written the same warnings and they had disappeared anyway. But doing something, anything, was better than waiting for it to drag me into the woods. By midnight, the cabin was dark except for the flickering candles. I sat cross-legged on the floor, rifle across my lap, the journal open beside me. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might split my chest. The knocking stopped. Total silence. Then, very softly, my name, not from outside, from right behind me. I spun around, rifle raised, but there was nothing there. The room was empty except for the wavering candlelight. The voice came again, this time from the window. My name, stretched and twisted like it was being dragged through something. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't answer it. Don't look at it, I whispered to myself. The window creaked. Slowly, so slowly, the latch began to lift on its own. My breath caught. I raised the rifle and aimed at the window, but my hands were trembling so badly I could barely keep the barrel steady. The latch clicked open. The candle nearest the window went out. The smell of cold flooded in, sharp and metallic. I couldn't stop myself. I looked. It was there, pressed against the glass. Taller than the frame, its head tilted sideways to fit. Its arms were long, ending in fingers that scraped the sill. Its skin, if it was skin, looked gray and stretched, like something that had been dried and hung out for too long. Where its face should have been, there was only darkness, but somehow I felt it looking at me. The journal slid from my lap. I raised the rifle and fired. The sound shattered the silence, the recoil jarring up my arms. The glass blew out of the window in a spray of shards. For a second, I thought I'd scared it off. Then the low moan rose, deafening inside my skull. The candles blew out one by one. The cabin went black. I scrambled backward, fumbling for my flashlight. When I clicked it on, the beam caught a shape in the corner. The long man was inside. It moved with a strange, jerking grace, arms dragging along the floor as it stepped forward. The salt at the corner hissed and smoked where its foot touched it, but it didn't stop. It kept coming, its head tilting like it was listening to my heartbeat. I fired again, but the shot went wide. My hands were slick with sweat. The rifle clicked empty. The thing straightened up, impossibly tall, its head almost touching the ceiling. It reached one long arm toward me, fingers splayed. The air around it grew colder until I could see my breath. In the chaos of fear, something in the journal flashed in my mind. Fire breaks the bond, my lighter. I fumbled in my pocket, pulling it out with shaking hands. I grabbed the cedar pouch from the doorframe, ripped it open, and dumped the contents onto the floor. Then I flicked the lighter and touched the flame to it. The cedar caught instantly, flaring up in a bright orange blaze. The smell filled the room, sharp and ancient. The long man recoiled, its moan rising into a shriek that rattled the windows. The fingers stopped inches from my face. I pushed the burning cedar toward it with my boot, shouting wordlessly. The flames licked across the floorboards, lighting the salt piles one by one. The smoke swirled, thick and choking, but I didn't stop. The long man stepped back, its form flickering like a shadow under a bright light. Its arms twisted, its head jerking as though in pain. The darkness where its face should have been seemed to pull inward, collapsing like an empty hole. And then, with one last sound, half moan, half scream, it vanished. The cabin shook as though something enormous had been torn away. Then silence. I stayed crouched on the floor, coughing on the smoke, staring at the empty space where it had stood. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't know if it was gone for good or just driven off, but for the first time in weeks, the silence felt like silence. When the fire burned down to embers, I grabbed my bag, the journal, and the rifle. I didn't wait for daylight. I didn't wait for the tow truck. I just left. I walked until my legs nearly gave out, until the trees thinned and the sky lightened to gray. By the time I reached the main road, dawn was breaking. A truck slowed when it saw me and a man leaned out the window. "You all right?" he called. I didn't know how to answer. I just nodded and climbed in. I never went back to the cabin. I left everything there except for the journal, which I still have. Sometimes late at night I open it and read the last page, the one I wrote myself. It spoke my name. It came for me, but fire drove it back. Even now, in a quiet apartment miles from those mountains, I sometimes wake up at night and think I hear it again. That low moan just at the edge of hearing. And I wonder if I really escaped, or if the long man is just waiting for me to be alone again.